discover how to make a bigger impact with your business in today's episode with Bessi Graham. Bessi Graham is a business and leadership strategist, TEDx speaker, CEO, and co-founder of Benefit Capital. And Bessi has driven over $1 billion of capital into small and medium-sized businesses, used their own capital to grant to dozens and invest directly both debt and equity in 42 businesses. So Bessi, please tell us, how can entrepreneurs make a bigger impact with their businesses?
Welcome to Awakened Titans podcast with Lily Patrascu. Mind-blowing conversations with influential business titans sharing how you can manifest abundance, love, joy, success through quantum awakening, quantum manifestation, quantum healing, quantum miracles, exponential business growth, and innovative products and services.
The piece that I think really it all comes down to is starting to question the unheld beliefs that we have around the purpose of business. Because for most of us, we've taken on board the idea that came up in the 70s through Friedman's work around the purpose of business is the maximization of shareholder value. So this profit maximization, that's what business is about. And really the underlying message of all of our work now for over 2 decades has been trying to demonstrate to people that if you instead merge these ideas of money and meaning, or doing good and making money, and you say, how could we actually use this as a competitive advantage? How do we build a stronger, more robust business that's resilient in these incredibly uncertain times that we're all operating in? And the way to do that is to take that broader approach and say, okay, if you merge money and meaning, and if you think about your business differently, you will actually spot risks far sooner and have a chance to mitigate them, because things that other business owners are ignoring, you're seeing. And you will be able to spot and leverage opportunities that will get you ahead of the competition. So it's really, at the heart of starting to make that shift in mindset as a business owner or a business leader. It's questioning the unconscious beliefs about the purpose of business, and then actively looking for how do we integrate into how we run this business to really create what I always talk about as a win-win business model. So when you succeed, when you make more money, it's not because you have actually put someone else out. It's not through that element of someone else has to lose for you to win, but through the added value you're creating in the world. That is what is also creating this beautiful self-reinforcing loop. When you do that, you really increase your chance of having that impactful business you can be proud of. But it also, importantly, in these crazy times that we're all running our businesses, gives you a more robust, thriving business, even in the uncertainty.
Thank you. How can entrepreneurs turn their passion and purpose into a profitable, sustainable, resilient business that thrives over the long term? What is the first step?
So one of the models that we've developed that I always use in that kind of first step for people who are trying to tick off all those really important elements you've just named is what we call the Thrive cycle. And it starts by saying we need to know the value that we bring. So you talked about some of those elements of like their passion or what it is they're really good at. Those pieces that are personal to us, if it's a small business, as the business gets bigger, it's about the organisation itself of like, these are the skills and the unique proposition that we have of what we bring. So that first element to actually build that thriving business is to deeply know and understand the value that you bring as an organisation, because that's how you're going to be able to position and differentiate in a very noisy market. But you don't want to just stop there, because I'm sure you've seen many business owners who are so in love with their own product or service that they kind of lose track of tuning into and responding to the customer. So the second step is to understand the value that your stakeholders want. Now, that might be your customers, it might be investors, it might be other people like your employees or the community that you operate in if you're running a factory, for example. So really tuning into and understanding what is that value that those key stakeholders actually want and need from you. And when you've got those two pieces and you actually understand them deeply, The next piece is where we start to see the results of what you were kind of hinting at there, which is the third element is that we then capture value in return. So it's through this strong positioning of knowing how to differentiate ourselves and the value we bring, but responding very intentionally to those desires of your key stakeholders. What then happens is you start to deliver results that drive revenue into your business. So that's that capture value in return. That is the most simple way to think about how to bring those things together.
Thank you. How can entrepreneurs leverage the idea that they have a massive purpose in order to attract impact investors to their business so they can make a much bigger impact than initially considered?
Sure. Well, it is an interesting area, and one that over the last sort of few decades has been growing. I first started to work in that space when it was called ethical investment back in the year 2000. Over the last sort of 10, 15 years, it's shifted into being referred to more as impact investment. There's different terms people use, but even if you have seen yourself as a standard business that's been more in that space that I spoke about at the beginning of focusing on profit maximization and running a really solid business, it is worth you being aware that there are now massive pools of capital, both big funds in terms of investment, but also individual investors who are looking in a more holistic way at where they place their money. So they are still wanting a financial return, but if you can tune into these elements that we're talking about today, what it allows you to do is to actually better communicate and position those elements of how your business is making a contribution. So not just about making a donation or to a non-profit or a charity, but are there elements in your supply chain or how you treat your staff or where you get your raw materials from? Are there elements around your packaging or the environmental benefits? Being able to name those and communicate them clearly helps you draw to you and tick some of those due diligence boxes of investors who are wanting more than just a financial return without asking these deeper questions of what are those flow-on effects of the work that you're doing in your business. So it really opens up a whole new pool of capital.
Thank you. For entrepreneurs starting new businesses, how can they communicate their message to potential investors in a way that it's apparent that they're not just ticking a box. They're really wanting to make a massive difference.
I love that you've pointed that out because there are so many instances where it turns into that ticking a box exercise. It's quite transactional. It's just like, yes, say this or name your values in a certain way or put up a certain logo on your social media. And that's not what we're talking about. When we get into this work, the main thing I would say that helps someone in those early days stand out, I have the benefit of, I see hundreds of applications and investment proposals every year that I'm assessing. And so I can see that difference really quickly. And what I'm always looking for when I have my investor hat on is I want you, even if you don't yet have critical elements of your business in place and operating, even if there are key roles that you don't yet have filled, or there's a big gap between you where you currently are and where you want to be operating in some of the things you care about, that's okay if you actually demonstrate to me as quickly as possible in your pitch or your deck or whatever information you're interacting with an investor on, show me that you're aware of those gaps and that you have a plan on how to get there. What I find is sometimes people think they have to pretend they've got it all together. So they're ticking the boxes and saying they have elements that are not yet in place. And that makes me trust you less. That doesn't impress me. A solid investor who does a lot of due diligence will see those things quickly. So you're better off being honest, but demonstrating you are strategically capable and that you know the gaps and you have a plan to fill them. And the second piece that you can do once you identify some of those gaps is put kind of temporary pieces in place. So, for example, often in the early stages, people don't have a governance board or some of those elements that help de-risk an investment. And that's okay, but you can do things like have an advisory board where you haven't yet committed to signing someone up as a director of your company and all of the complications that go with that. But you could, for example, fill some key roles that you can't afford to hire for yet in an advisory board at a much lower risk to you, but to signal to an investor, I'm aware that we're going to need this input and skill set and experience in our team to actually de-risk the investment and increase the chance of success.
Thank you. What is the blueprint for entrepreneurs to make a bigger impact with their business if they were to start from scratch?
So if we kind of come right back to the practicalities, obviously depending on your specific business, there will be unique angles that we might pursue. But from a blueprint perspective, I would say there's kind of 4 key steps. The first is around taking a strengths-based approach. So if we go back to when I talked about that Thrive cycle, and the first piece being you need to kind of know the value that you bring as a company. In the blueprint, it's the same. It's starting with that strength-based approach of really whether you use profiling tools, coaching, reflection exercises, sitting in and knowing and understanding that strengths-based approach is a really important foundation. And then the next piece is to do some of the vision casting, both for yourself as the individual leader and for the business, to project forward and trust yourself that even though you're not there yet, you do know what you want. There is that sense that if you make it more specific and more sensory, you can have a more compelling vision of where you're headed. And when you do that, there's a second element to that vision casting that I always get leaders to do, which is to look at either specific roles or role models of businesses, people who are doing something that kind of taps into or is partly connected to that vision you have, because that helps us when we move into the third step, which is to identify gaps. So we've done the first bit of strengths-based approach of knowing ourselves and the business, done the vision casting. Now when we move into really identifying the gap, we can use some simple tools like either kind of saying, one of them is I talk about run it through to its logical end. So take how you're currently operating, the results you're currently getting, and project those forward. Do they get you close to that vision, or is there kind of a big gap? And the other thing that might be helpful is to reverse engineer. So when we've got those role models of businesses or people that we've identified in our vision casting, pull apart and do a bit of detective work and look for the patterns of, are there certain kind of qualifications, experience in certain sectors? What's there that is common amongst those pieces that we can use to reverse engineer and put in place in our own leadership, in our own team and business, those elements that increase the chance of us getting to our vision. And then the last kind of step from that practical perspective is to figure out what those next steps are. So you need to kind of make a plan. You need to take that first step and commit to the journey of heading to that vision. So they would be kind of the 4 steps I would take from a blueprint perspective.
Thank you. For entrepreneurs who would like to make a bigger impact with their business, what's a good place to start to attract joint venture partners that will help them in this vision of making a bigger impact faster?
You know what's interesting? Many of the pieces that we've already run through will help you here. So if you've done those steps we've talked about, for example, to identify a good joint venture partner, you need to be able to articulate what you bring to the table. And you also need to be able to articulate the gaps you have, right? Because that's what you want from the partner. The last thing you want to do is create a joint venture with someone who is exactly the same as you, and then all the weaknesses are still present and you're kind of treading on each other's toes. So if you go through the steps we've already talked about, you will be better positioned to choose wisely who you partner with. And I would say to have more success rate, because you will be convincing and compelling in the way you can paint the vision of what you're trying to create. You can tell them what you bring and what your skills are and why you are talking to them, right? So the piece of making it specific, no one wants someone to come in a generic sense of like, I'm looking for a partner, and you want to have that piece of, you've done your research, you know why it's this particular organization you want to partner with. So going through the steps we've already talked about is the foundation piece. And then you want to be quite discerning in how you go about that, because just like choosing a a co-founder in a business or bringing on a director or an investor will shape your experience, that lived experience as that business owner or leader. The same goes with a joint venture. If you're going to be working that closely with an organisation, you want to make sure there's some good alignment and that you'll actually enjoy it.
Thank you. What's a good way for entrepreneurs to raise millions of dollars for their business so that they can start making the impact they desire?
It's an interesting one. I was talking to an organisation yesterday about this because they had come to us asking for some help around a capital raise. And the first thing I said to them is, why do you think that you need external capital? Because just like we have those unquestioned beliefs about the purpose of business, often as business owners, when we're feeling overwhelmed or money's tight, cash flow's difficult, we can fall into the trap of thinking money is the answer to all our problems. And if I just got, someone just gave me $5 million, everything would be fixed. What I say to leaders when they're in that space around hoping that there'll be this silver bullet of millions of dollars of investment is that we need to be careful to first understand where the business is at and what's actually appropriate. Because if your business is already bleeding, when you put those millions of dollars in, you will now hemorrhage, right? So you will die quicker because the money's just going to flow through the system and not actually help. So money on its own, millions of dollars of investment, is not necessarily the end goal unless we've done the work first to kind of look at, well, what is it that is currently not working? Is investment the best option for that? And if it is, what type of investment, what type of investor? Sometimes it's actually better for you to keep the upside for yourself and take on some patient capital or debt rather than an investor who wants equity. Sometimes you are not in a position to be able to have the cash flow to pay someone back in that debt sense. And so even though you may not want to give away equity, it's going to be necessary. So it's this piece of not always jumping to the conclusion of money is the answer or it will fix everything, but going through the process of figuring out what you need. And another kind of tip of where I often end up pushing business leaders to explore first is that when we think about the fact that we need more money in our business to achieve that impact and to expand the work that we're able to do, one of the best investors you can get is a customer, right? Because if we think about that element of more money in the business, don't underplay how much time and the amount of distraction it will be trying to do a capital raise. To do it well, it takes a lot, it's going to divert a lot of your attention. And very often, particularly in smaller or earlier stage businesses, if they put that same level of time, effort, and money into really understanding their customers and delivering great value to them, they would get that injection of cash. You can do clever things like pre-sale. You can do crowdsourcing elements to test new products and get the cash in first and de-risk the growth of the business. So be creative and think bigger about what type of money might be best, and then be very discerning if you are bringing investors in to make sure there is that alignment and they're the types of people you actually want on your team.
Thank you. What's the best way to incentivize and motivate and retain employees or contractors or outsourcers that often don't have necessarily the motivation to stick around for a really long time? And of course, you as the business, you have the intention to keep them for as long as possible because you will have invested thousands of pounds in their training. And if they were to leave, that could cause a serious problem for the longer term.
It's an interesting one because this is actually a really strong case for coming right back to that piece we said at the beginning of this idea of merging money and meaning and starting to realize that you can have a more robust business, that you can build a thriving business even in an uncertain market if you bring these things back together. The way that I think about that related to employees, contractors, people in the supply chain, all of those elements that you've spoken about, is that if all we are is one of many options of where they can get a transactional relationship that they're paid for, turning up, just, being a cog in the wheel or that system, there's no extra motivation like you were hinting at of like them feeling some sense of purpose or connection to your organization or to what you do. They don't see the direct link between the work they do and the outcomes you achieve. When we start to think more powerfully about the fact that our business is already having an impact in the world, but are we creating something we're actually proud of, and then we're more intentional with the decisions we make and how we spend our money, if we then communicate that consistently and clearly to our team, we draw to us employees, contractors, and supply chain providers who go, if I'm going to work with anyone in that broader sector, I'm going to work with the person who I also have an alignment to. I love the way they do business. I like the way that they care for their employees. So it's these win-wins. It comes back to creating a self-reinforcing loop. If you don't see creating a solid, healthy culture and the well-being of those who actually work for you as just some annoying expense, and you instead say, this can decrease my issues around retention rates. It's going to reduce my costs of training, recruitment, all of those elements. When you then add on, so that's the risks you're avoiding, the benefits of those people are going to serve your customers better. They're going to stay around longer. All of the research shows they have less sick days. Also, there's a term I'm not sure if you're familiar with called presenteeism. An employee can be present at work, but they're not actually really performing. Those issues are all addressed when we actually help people feel that sense of contribution and purpose in the work that they are doing themselves. So that's how I would address that, through this idea of merging money and meaning.
Thank you. How can entrepreneurs motivate their team to feel like they're part of family? And what kind of values should they communicate through their actions and through their words so that there is a genuine feeling of being accepted and loved and appreciated, recognized at work? And please also tell me what other feelings should the employees of entrepreneurs feel that would enable them to feel almost like entrenched in the business, feeling like they're part of it. They're such a big part of it that they wouldn't even consider leaving.
One of the key answers to that question is that, like everything in life, what will get you the results in that space is your consistent behavior, not just what you say. So there's always this tricky ground which happens where we can be tempted to think, well, if I verbalize certain kinds of values like inclusivity or honesty, integrity, like these big generic words, then that will convey to my team that they can trust me, that this is safe, that they can feel all of those things you just described. Part of what I would really caution leaders on is that we need to think through and only articulate values and discuss publicly elements that are actually important to us and embedded in our behavior as an organisation. Because otherwise what will happen is, rather than strengthen those feelings that you're desiring to create for your employees, they will start to trust you less and be more cautious, because they'll be like, oh, that's interesting. You're saying one thing, but my experience of working here is the exact opposite. So there isn't so much a certain set of values that you should adopt or certain language you should use, but it is about the elements of speaking truthfully into what makes your company unique, what you do value and you wouldn't compromise on. Because I always think about these things related to, what does that look like in action and is it present? If it's not, you can talk about it as being aspirational, but you shouldn't name it as, say, a core value, because it's not actually present yet. So that's sort of the first element related to that. If we go into some of the other aspects that you were talking about, of these really desirable and quite beneficial elements that it would be great to create in our culture, I would look more to things like, there's some great work that's been done around a concept of psychological safety, or to look into a lot of the work that's being done under the well-being heading. So it's these elements of saying there are key pieces that if they're in place, people will start to feel those pieces you spoke about. If they'll feel, I'm allowed and safe to be my true self. I don't need to hold things back. I don't need to be nervous that someone's going to get angry at me, or that I'll be punished for saying the wrong thing. these types of elements, they would be the two areas that I would go to. Doing some reading and then thinking about what that could look like in action in your company to create that psychological safety, and to think about in a really meaningful way, again, not a ticker box token way, but a meaningful way, how could we be more conscious of and put in place the actions and behaviours to back it up that we actually care about the well-being of our staff.
Thank you. How can entrepreneurs incentivize their team to perform better? So much so that they are not just at work, but they're actually so productive and so happy to be productive.
It's an interesting one, because a little bit like the aspect when we were talking about how you do that with the contractors or team or supply chain, the same piece goes here for team members and the motivation element. Often we feel that like we're clear as the leader on what our vision is, and we know why it's important that the company hits certain targets or goals or KPIs, but we haven't actually communicated it clearly. We haven't been explicit. We've assumed that it was intuitively just known by everyone in the company. And again, there's a lot of research around these elements of purpose or meaning that show often at the executive level, the leadership level, there's a strong sense of purpose, and they understand what that vision is and why their work is contributing to it. But it tends to drop off significantly when you move below that executive or leadership level. And that is because of the challenge I just spoke about, that it hasn't been made explicit. It was assumed that everybody understood it. Now, this may not be, again, depending on the size of your business, it may not be you directly speaking with each person, but different team leaders need to be sitting with their team and explicitly connecting the dots between here's the company's broader strategy, here's what we're trying to achieve, or the targets we have, whether that's around revenue or number of clients or the satisfaction of customers or whatever those targets are for you. At the level of a team, that team leader needs to be saying, here's how the work we do in this team, here's how your role plays a critical part in us achieving that as a company. That level of time and effort to understand and connect people's actual actions and their role to the goals of the company is critical. And the other part that it allows you to do is down at that level of a team and a direct manager or leader, they do need to be genuinely, like not in a superficial way, but actually caring about and knowing the people on their team, which goes back to your previous question of sort of that well-being element of how the employees and team are actually feeling working in your company. If as a manager or a leader, you can understand what are the personal goals or desires of that team member, you can even take it a step further and motivate them by saying, not only are we in a team here where we've made it clear of how your work will contribute to the company winning and hitting its goals, but here's how that makes sense for you as an individual. If they're saving up to buy a home or they want to send their kids to a better school, you can show the connection. When the company wins, they win. You'll get this bonus, or you'll have this element that will now bring in a new level of support or flexibility for you to work from home and pick your kids up, right? So we need to connect it to what they care about as well as connect it to the delivery of the company goals.
Thank you. Tell us how you work with entrepreneurs to help them achieve their goals.
Yeah, so the some of the frameworks that we've talked about today are the work that we do on an individual business. So I always say one of the bits I get very frustrated about when I see people who have spent hundreds of thousands of dollars with different consultants is that most of the time when people engage an advisor or a consultant, that person just comes in with kind of cookie cutter off the shelf answers of do this, do that, and starts making suggestions and giving advice straight away. Our approach is to sit, and we do this very detailed deep dive that we call a triage, where we look at all of the assets you already have. We look at your business model. We look at all of the work you've already done with other consultants or projects you have in the mix, and really deeply understand the business first, understand where there's underutilized assets, where there's risks, where there's opportunities. And then from that place of understanding your context, It's only then that we move into either doing specific trainings that are required to develop the capability internally, building up certain elements around these frameworks we've talked about, and ultimately then doing a piece at the end of that, which is around that implementation support. Because again, what I am not a fan of is, running a 3-day workshop and then saying, good luck with that. Because all of us who have done this long enough know that it doesn't matter how beautiful it is that you design something in a workshop and feel really motivated. When the rubber hits the road and things don't go to plan, you need to have support there. And so all of our work, when we work directly one-on-one with a business leader, is around making sure that for a minimum of 3 months, preferably 6, we have that. We're there as the sounding board. We can refine the design when it doesn't work. So it's really that element of saying, how do we get you to a place right back to what we talked about at the beginning, where you have a thriving business that is able to be financially secure, but also something you're really proud of. And that takes time and intention. But if you build that, unlike other companies who are just at the whim of whatever changes happen, you can have a smoother run through the tricky waters of running a business.
Thank you. Tell us where entrepreneurs can find you and your products and services.
Sure. So 2 options. From a company perspective and working directly with us, just go to benefit.capital. And from the perspective of just getting some more information, listening to the podcast, accessing the YouTube channel, the best option for that is bessigraham.com.
Follow us for more interviews with world's most influential business titans, providing you with the insights to awaken to your full potential, so you can get paid to be yourself, find true happiness, and manifest anything you desire.